continue the Russia theme when it comes to the postponement and indeed cancelling of elections over there. We've now got the head of the Electoral Commission criticising the Labour government for postponing these elections. Why would the government know better than the Electoral Commission's own head? This is the watchdog for elections in this country. We've now got 4.5 million people denied their democratic right in May.
I think, as again, cool. I mean, as a Scottish MP, that's not something I've been directly affected by. We're carrying on. As you would imagine, we've got elections in May where we'll try and make an Sarwar the First Minister of Scotland after 20 years of the SNP failing on public services like health, education and elsewhere. Again, this is something that I think we've seen the government have very strong and robust reasons why they are choosing to, why the local authorities are choosing to postpone those elections. In the meantime, of course, democracy is an absolutely vital thing to continue with. Those elections will be held down the line at more appropriate times. But the requests for those elections to be postponed have come from the councils themselves. And I think that's the thing to remember as well. My focus is on what I'll be doing later on this morning, which is knocking doors in Dunfermline and Dollar and campaigning for our fantastic Scottish Labour candidates for the elections in May.
All right, imagine this. You wake up on May 7th, ready to cast your vote, make your voice heard, exercise your democratic right as a British citizen, and then you find out the elections have been cancelled. Not postponed for a natural disaster, not delayed for a national emergency, just cancelled. Because apparently the government decided democracy was a bit inconvenient this year. Wild, right? Well, buckle up because Sir Keir Starmer is about to get dragged into the High Court over what might be the most brazen power move we've seen in British politics in decades. This isn't just about local elections. This is about whether a prime minister can simply hit the pause button on democracy when it suits him. And spoiler alert, Reform UK is not having it. I'm Brit Article, and today we're diving into the legal battle that could define the boundaries of executive power in modern Britain. If you love political drama served with a side of constitutional crisis, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and smash that notifications bell because this story is about to get absolutely mental. So let's set the scene. 30 local elections, originally scheduled for May 7th, affecting roughly 4.6 million voters across England. Gone. Vanished like your motivation on a Monday morning. Now, you might be thinking, surely there's a good reason, right? Maybe an alien invasion, economic collapse, a particularly aggressive strain of flu? Nope. The official reason? Local government reorganization. Yeah, you heard that right. Apparently, shuffling some council boundaries around is more important than letting nearly 5 million people vote. It's like canceling Christmas because you need to reorganize the sock drawer. The audacity is genuinely impressive in the worst possible way. Now, here's where it gets juicy. Reform UK, led by the one and only Nigel Farage, who, love him or loathe him, absolutely lives for this kind of constitutional showdown, is taking the government to court. And they're not pulling punches. The court papers describe this whole situation as fundamentally irrational and an abuse of power that threatens democracy, which, let's be honest, is probably the most British way to say, what the hell are you doing? The lawyers are basically arguing that unless we're in the middle of a world war or dealing with another pandemic, minor inconveniences like that, there's absolutely no rational justification for canceling elections in peacetime. And you know what? They've got a point. Because here's the thing. Democracy isn't supposed to be convenient for the people in power. That's literally the entire point. But wait. It gets better. The legal challenge isn't just about principle, though there's plenty of that to go around. Reform UK's lawyers are making a devastatingly simple argument that honestly should make anyone nervous, regardless of their political leanings. They're saying the reason for cancellation is no reason other than politics. In other words, this isn't about administrative efficiency or good governance. This is about a government that's allegedly running scared from the ballot box. And if that doesn't send a chill down your spine, you haven't been paying attention to history. Because once you establish the precedent that elections can be canceled for administrative reasons, you've basically handed governments a get-out-of-accountability free card. Today, it's local elections because of council reorganization. Tomorrow, who knows? Maybe we'll cancel the general election because Parliament needs a fresh coat of paint. Now, Nigel Farage, who is expected to attend both days of the hearing next Thursday and Friday, probably with popcorn, wrote an absolutely scathing piece calling this the stuff of banana republics. And while that might sound like typical Farage hyperbole, is he wrong, though? He argues that local elections aren't just some minor administrative box-ticking exercise. They're the very heartbeat of grassroots democracy. And honestly, when you strip away all the political theater, that's fundamentally true. Local councils control your bins, your roads, your schools, your planning permissions. They decide whether that dodgy developer can build a massive housing estate in your back garden. These decisions affect your daily life more directly than most of what happens in Westminster. So yeah, maybe letting people vote on who makes those decisions is kind of important. All right, let's talk about the legal mechanics here, because this is where things get properly interesting. The government's authority to cancel these elections comes from Section 87 of the Local Government Act of 2000, which is such an obscure piece of legislation that even constitutional lawyers probably had to Google it. This section gives Steve Reed, the local government secretary, powers to alter the timing of local authority polls. Key word there. Alter the timing. It's meant to be a tool for adjusting election cycles while promoting local accountability, not a nuclear button to obliterate elections entirely. Reform UK's legal team is arguing that Reid has operated entirely without the framework of what Parliament intended when they wrote this law. Essentially, they're saying he's taken a scalpel designed for minor adjustments and used it as a sledgehammer to demolish democracy, which is quite the legal flex if you think about it. But here's my absolute favorite part of this entire debacle, the justification based on council capacity. The government's argument is essentially that some councils are too busy with reorganization to run elections properly. Let me get this straight. Councils that are well-managed and competent enough to handle both reorganization and elections get to proceed with democracy as normal, but councils that are struggling, poorly run, or frankly incompetent, the ones where voter accountability is arguably most needed, get a free pass to deny their citizens the right to vote by claiming they're too overwhelmed? Do you see the problem here? It's like saying, your house is a mess, so we're not going to let anyone inspect it until you've cleaned up. The logic is completely backwards. The worse a council performs, the more important it is that voters get to hold them accountable, not less. Reform's lawyers are highlighting this absurdity, asking the fundamental question, where is the rationality in a democracy to deny elections? And honestly, the silence from the government on that question is deafening. Now, just in case you think this is all political grandstanding from Reform UK, let's bring in some independent voices. Vijay Rangarajan, the chief executive of the Electoral Commission, literally the people whose entire job is to oversee elections, has basically said, yeah, this doesn't make sense. He's emphasized that capacity constraints don't provide adequate justification for delaying polls, and that authorities must conduct elections according to statutory timetables. He even dropped this absolute banger of a quote. We would hope that no government would go and say that somehow elections are fungible with other parts of council money. Translation, elections aren't just another budget item you can shuffle around when it's inconvenient. They're fundamental rights. The Electoral Commission has also pointed out something rather awkward. There's a massive conflict of interest when councils get to decide how long they can delay facing voter scrutiny. It's like letting students grade their own exams and then being shocked when everyone gives themselves an A+. And here's where the story takes a properly rebellious turn. Multiple councillors are reportedly waiting for the outcome of this judicial review before deciding to resign in protest. Let that sink in. Elected representatives are so uncomfortable with this decision that they're considering walking away from their positions entirely. But the real heroes of the story? The residents who've started refusing to pay their council tax, arguing there should be no taxation without representation, which, if you paid attention in history class, is literally the principle that started the American Revolution. These people are channeling their inner Boston Tea Party, minus the harbor and the tea. They're saying, if we don't get to vote for our councilors, why should we fund them? It's civil disobedience with a distinctly British flavor, polite, measured, but absolutely unmovable. The government seems to think constitutional issues won't generate the same public anger as tax increases or immigration. They might want to reconsider that assumption, because "they canceled my election" hits differently than "they raised my taxes." One feels like policy disagreement, the other feels like theft of basic rights. So next Thursday and Friday, the High Court will hear arguments that could fundamentally reshape the boundaries of executive power in Britain. The stakes? Oh, nothing much, just whether a government can unilaterally decide that democracy is temporarily inconvenient and needs a rain check. Reform UK's lawyers will argue that unless we're literally in a world war or facing an apocalyptic pandemic, there's no rational basis for canceling elections. The government will presumably argue that council reorganization is super complicated and we should all just trust them to sort it out without that pesky accountability thing getting in the way. And somewhere, probably in a courtroom gallery, Nigel Farage will be watching with the intensity of a man who spent his entire political career fighting what he sees as democratic deficits. But here's what this case is really about, stripped of all the legal jargon and political posturing. Can a government, in peacetime, cancel elections because they're administratively inconvenient? And if the answer is yes, what's to stop future governments from finding increasingly creative reasons to delay facing voters? Sorry, we're too busy with trade negotiations. Sorry, we're reorganizing the NHS. Sorry, Mercury is in retrograde and our astrologer says it's bad timing. Once you accept the principle that democracy can be put on hold for non-emergency administrative reasons, you've opened a door that's incredibly difficult to close. That's why this case matters, regardless of how you feel about Reform UK, Labour, or any other party. This isn't about partisan politics, it's about whether the basic mechanisms of democracy are negotiable. The government's reliance on Section 87 of the Local Government Act 2000 is telling. They're using legislation designed for fine-tuning election timing as justification for wholesale cancellation. It's like using a clause about adjusting thermostats as justification for demolishing the entire building. The law wasn't written for this purpose, and Parliament almost certainly didn't intend it to be used this way. Which raises another uncomfortable question. If the government has to stretch obscure legislation to breaking point to justify their actions, maybe those actions weren't justified in the first place. Just a thought. Look, whether you think Keir Starmer is a Democratic villain or whether you believe council reorganization genuinely requires delaying elections, one thing is undeniable. This case will set a precedent. If the High Court rules that the government acted within its powers, future governments will remember. They'll know they have this tool in their arsenal. And history suggests that powers granted to governments in one context rarely stay confined to that context. They expand. They get reinterpreted. They become normalized. That's how democracies slowly erode, not through dramatic coups or revolutions, but through small, seemingly reasonable exceptions that gradually become the rule. So yeah, maybe this case deserves your attention. Maybe those 4.6 million people who lost their vote deserve your support, regardless of how they would have voted. Because today it's their elections. Tomorrow? Well, precedents have a funny way of coming around. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.